Hi, so today we are going to look at a criminal abortion death that happened in 1919. And we're not just going to look at the woman and how she died, the doctor and how he treated her, but we're going to look at the abortion law, and we are going to look at how the media covers it. And if you think that the media is a bunch of rah-rah, sis-boom-bah cheerleaders for the abortion lobby now, this is nothing new. Marie died in 1919, but this is the 100th anniversary of the 1920 cheerleading for abortion and weeping and gnashing of teeth over these horrible laws just requiring doctors to let women die. And you'll see when we get to it. Okay. And my sources, when I am talking about Marie's death, it's the summary of the case and the doctor's appeal, because he was convicted and he did appeal, and what the courts concluded and the decision they made on his appeal. So this is from summaries of court testimony, not some third-party source, some website, or even newspaper articles. This is straight from what was shared in the courtroom. You need to keep that in mind when you're judging how accurate and truthful I'm being. Okay? So Marie Agassianov was the wife of the Russian Attaché during World War I. Now, she died on July 11th of 1919 from complications of a criminal abortion that was performed July 5th by Dr. Julius Hammer. This guy is the father of industrialist Armand Hammer, and the name is a deliberate pun. Julius Hammer was a dyed-in-the-wool communist who named his son Arm and Hammer because his support for communism was so strong. So that's who this character was. Okay. Now, Dr. Hammer was a 1902 graduate of the College of Physicians and Surgeons. Okay. Now, Marie died in her home. Now, something you need to keep in mind, this was 1919, and people did not go to hospitals as readily as they do now. I even have an obstetrical nursing book from the 1930s on my bookshelf that has instructions for how to prepare the woman's kitchen table for an emergency C-section. Okay, so we are talking the era where kitchen table surgery was not unheard of. People did go to hospitals, but people also did receive extremely intensive care, even in the home, even surgery, even when their lives were in danger. Going into the hospital was not a given at this point, so just kind of keep that in mind. But the autopsy performed after Marie died found that she had been about a month into her pregnancy, and this is important. All of her internal organs looked normal except for some damage caused by the sepsis. So there was no sign of any obvious kidney or heart ailment. And there was also no sign that she was suffering from influenza. Okay. Now, Marie's maid testified that she went with Marie to Hammer's office on the morning of Saturday, July 5th. Now, both the maid and Marie's husband did say that Marie had had headaches for a couple of days prior to going to Dr. Hammer's office, but that other than that, she didn't seem particularly unwell. But the maid said that when they left, Marie was in a lot of pain. She was so weak that she needed help going down the stairs, and she told the chauffeur to please drive slowly when he was taking her home. And the chauffeur corroborated this. And on returning home, the maid helped Marie to go to bed and noticed there were bright red spots of blood on her underwear. Now, Marie's husband testified that Marie had seemed okay when he left for work Saturday morning. He came home around 4 or 5 in the afternoon and she was in bed. Now, next morning, he spoke to her. He was concerned about her. She seemed unwell, but he tried to call Hammer and couldn't reach him. He wasn't able to get hold of Hammer until that evening, and he said that Marie was ill and had a very high fever. So Hammer came over to the house that evening, peered into Marie's throat, and said that she had grip, maybe flu, which grip is another term for influenza. And Marie's husband was very anxious, but Hammer admitted that he had performed a little operation, but that she was in no danger. And people understood at the time that when you talk vaguely about an operation, you meant an abortion. So Hammer had told Marie's husband that he'd done an abortion. Okay. So Hammer returned again on Monday and again on Tuesday. On Tuesday, he performed an internal exam, but Marie's husband testified. Hammer assured him that Marie was in no danger and was in fact recovering. Mr. Oganesov was not convinced and asked Hammer about getting a second opinion, and he said that Hammer told him, "There's nothing dangerous. We can see tomorrow. I can bring my friend doctor." Mr. Oganesov suggested hiring a nurse to help care for Marie, and Hammer responded, "Very sorry, no, it is very difficult to get." So by Wednesday evening, Marie's husband had had enough of Hammer stalling on this, and he called in another doctor. Now, documents don't give a name for this doctor, so I'm going to call him Dr. A. Now, when Marie's husband told Dr. Hammer that he was going to call in another doctor, he said that Hammer told him not to tell the other doctor about the little operation. Okay? You need to keep in mind, he specifically said not to tell the doctor about this. So Dr. A arrived, examined Marie, and immediately sent for 2 nurses to help provide care. He called Hammer and said that Marie showed signs of peritonitis. And Dr. A testified that Hammer kept insisting, no, it was influenza, it was influenza. She'd had a sore throat for 6 days, which, having had influenza for 6 days, isn't matching with what Marie's maid and her husband said, which was that other than a periodic headache, she seemed okay. So Dr. A said that he insisted to Hammer that he didn't see any signs of influenza, only peritonitis. Friday morning, Dr. A called in 2 other physicians to help. All 3 of them agreed that she was dying of peritonitis. They were trying to save her, but at that point, you have to remember, this is before antibiotics. There really wasn't much they can do for her. But Hammer kept interjecting himself into the situation, telling Dr. A that he, Hammer, was the attending physician, that when Marie died, he, Hammer, should fill out the death certificate, and that he was going to wasn't going to put peritonitis, he was going to put influenza. And he was bugging Marie's husband. Now, when she dies, I'm the one that fills out the death certificate. It was influenza. Okay? So, Marie died. The autopsy showed that, yeah, the other doctors were right. It was peritonitis. This was an abortion, and Hammer was charged with manslaughter. Now, during the trial, Hammer testified that Marie had phoned him on July 4th saying that she needed to see him urgently. And he said that he tried to put her off because he was out in the country with his family. He didn't want to come into the city and deal with her, but she pestered, so he agreed to come in and see her on the 5th. He said that he had also performed a curettage on Marie about a year earlier, so this wasn't the first time she'd come to him for this. Now, Hammer said that when Marie arrived around 10 a.m., she told him that her period was 9 days late and that she'd felt miserably sick for the previous 2 weeks, which, again, his testimony isn't matching with what Marie's husband and Marie's housekeeper were saying, which was that other than the headache, she seemed fine. Now, he said that Marie told him that she'd attempted her standard home abortion with a crochet hook cleaned with peroxide, but this time hadn't gotten the desired result, that the bleeding looked bright red and didn't look like menstrual flow. And she said she couldn't keep any food down, had a headache, and was just miserable. Now, Hammer said that Marie just pestered him to finish the abortion that she tried to start with the crochet hook. Hammer said that Marie said to him, "There is no use persuading me to leave it go. You know my history. You know I cannot leave it go. It is a question whether you are going to relieve me or keep me in misery for a few weeks, and I will go to have it done anyway." And so there's not any sign here that there's any health urgency. That's something you need to keep in mind. Okay. Now, he said that he had told her that she shouldn't be doing home abortions with a crochet hook because you couldn't properly sterilize it with just peroxide. Now, Hammer said that when he told Marie that he didn't want to do the abortion because he wanted to go back out to the countryside and join his family, he told her that she should either go home or go to a hospital, and she laid into him. Well, then how can you talk to me about postponing the case when you said to me yourself I might have infected myself, and in such a case every hour may count? So Hammer testified that at this point, I was in a quandary. I felt I didn't care for this job. I didn't want that job, but I called in Dr. Diamond. Now, Dr. Diamond had been a physician for about 18 months. He worked with Hammer and he lived with Hammer's family. Now, Hammer said that he explained the situation to Diamond as he was washing his hands in preparation for examining Marie. So at this point, he had Marie up on the exam table. He's washing his hands. He's talking to Diamond. He does an exam. He pulls out his fingers. There's blood on his glove. He shows it to Diamond and asks him, what would you do under these circumstances? And Hammer said that Diamond said, yeah, he'd do a curettage, which a curettage is just scraping out the uterus with a curette. And if you do it on a woman who has a viable fetus in there, you're doing an abortion. You're aborting the baby. Now, with no other doctor or nurse present, so evidently he sent Diamond out of the room, or Diamond just went home because it was 4th of July weekend. Hammer proceeded with the curettage, he said, then swabbed out Marie's uterus. And he said that Marie reported a mild sore throat. He told her she should gargle. She said she had been gargling. Hammer also testified that Marie told him she'd been to many doctors in Europe and the United States, all of whom had told her she had heart and kidney problems and shouldn't have any more children. Now, Diamond testified that he had spoken to Marie in a mix of English and Russian. She had told him the story about using the crochet hook, that she'd been bleeding since the previous day. He testified that she had a menstrual pad in her underwear and that there was some blood on it. Now, Diamond testified that Marie told him that 6 or 8 years earlier, when she'd been in Europe, she'd taken very ill when she was 3 or 4 months into a pregnancy. She was so sick that she was hospitalized. The doctors told her that she had heart and kidney trouble and needed an abortion to save her life. They performed it at that time and then told her not to get pregnant again because another pregnancy might kill her. And then Diamond testified that Marie told him that she'd become pregnant on numerous occasions since that first abortion, and that each time she'd either gotten a doctor to perform an abortion or had done one herself with a crochet hook. Now, the crochet hook story sounds really, really self-serving to me because Marie is a very rich, well-connected woman who she already got a doctor to perform an abortion in a hospital. No problems whatsoever doing that. So why would she be doing home abortions with a crochet hook when she's got the money and the resources and the connections to go to a doctor? Makes no sense. Now, apparently, the only actual examination that Dr. Diamond did was listening to Marie's heart with a stethoscope, but didn't do any examination to actually check her kidney function, look in her throat for this sore throat, and nobody even bothered to take her temperature, which, I'm sorry, this really pathetic lack of a preoperative examination is something I see all the time. This is nothing new. So, now, some other doctors testified on Hammer's behalf. Now, again, none of these doctors are named in my source document, so I'll call this one doctor, Dr. B. He said that he had cared for Marie in July of 1917. She had been about 3 or 4 months pregnant and had a heart disease. She told him that a European doctor told her she must not bear any more children, and she said that she'd had several curettage abortions performed since that time. Dr. B said that he didn't bother performing an abortion because Marie seemed to be in the process of miscarrying at the time. So, again, some doctors will perform a curettage for a miscarriage, but this guy didn't feel it was necessary. The other doctor, I'll call Dr. C, testified that Marie had come to him in January of 1918 describing the repeated abortion she'd had for health reasons and showing symptoms of a uterine disease. There's no details about that in the source document, and said that she feared she might be pregnant. And Dr. C said that he hadn't been able to determine for sure whether Marie was pregnant, but decided to do a curettage just to be on the safe side. And just for reference, doing a curettage on a woman who might be pregnant, unless you were doing that, believing it was to save her life, that would be considered an abortion, and you'd be guilty of manslaughter if she died from that. So, now 2 other doctors were called in to give expert testimony. So the situation as Hammer described it was presented to them. They said that if they believed that a pregnant patient needed a curettage, in other words, an abortion, that they would do it either in a hospital or in the woman's home. And again, like I said, doing these things in the home wasn't a weird, freaky thing at that time. Now, Marie had already had at least one abortion in a hospital, so probably had she gone to one of these doctors and they thought that her life was in danger, they would have checked Marie into a hospital. But they would certainly want her to be someplace where she could remain in bed for 24 hours. One of the doctors also noticed that he would never do such a procedure on a woman who's in her street clothes and never without a nurse or other assistant present. And both of them said that they would definitely get a second opinion to verify that the curettage, the abortion, was necessary to save the woman's life. So basically, the jury was considering some factors. Like, talking to Dr. Diamond really wasn't a legit second opinion. Dr. Diamond didn't really examine Marie. He just heard the same thing she told Hammer, listened to her heart, and then, yeah, do a curettage and left. And Hammer was doing this procedure, so he's doing it without a real, genuine second opinion to make sure he's doing the right thing. Because remember, if she's in serious health, her health is in danger, the abortion might be the thing that pushes her over into the grave. You have to be careful to make sure that the abortion doesn't trigger her death. Which is why, if you got a woman with lots of money like Marie, you check her into the hospital, and if she doesn't have a lot of money, you set things up in her house so that they're clean and sanitary. Like that obstetrical nursing book says how to do. The failure to perform any kind of proper examination, take her temperature, find out, did she actually have an infection? So there's just this inadequate exploration of whether the curettage was even necessary. Hammer did not instruct Marie of the risk of fever and infection and tell her that she needed to take her temperature and call him in if she developed a fever, which a reasonable physician would have done. And then when she was clearly ill with fever, signs of infection, this can kill her, he did not follow through by asking for help from another doctor. He did not follow through by getting nursing care. He did not do the things that Dr. A, the responsible physician, did when Marie's husband called him in. And then even after Mr. Ogonosov transferred care of his wife over to Dr. A, Hammer kept showing up, insisting that Marie had influenza, withholding that vital information that he had performed this curettage, which supposedly he had done to save her life, which these doctors testified that would be a reasonable, legitimate thing to do. You check her into the hospital or you do it in her home, but yes, you do it and you have another doctor involved. But he withheld this information from them. And then he wouldn't shut up about wanting to be the one to sign the death certificate and wanting to put influenza on it. So the jurors clearly didn't think that Hammer's behavior indicated that he'd done an abortion in good faith trying to save Marie's life. In fact, he seemed more concerned with falsifying her death certificate than in saving her life, even when 3 doctors and 2 nurses were fighting to save her. Now, okay, so Hammer was convicted of manslaughter, sentenced to 3.5 to 15 years. Now, the media immediately started drumming up the most melodramatic outrage. And one example is a headline in the July 20th, 1920 Chicago Tribune. Fight for life, jails physician who broke law. Court rules statutes higher than science. And then the opening 2 paragraphs. The law is the law, regardless of physicians or ethics, and regardless of life or death. The law says that certain surgical operations are against the rights of society, and therefore they are criminal. Nothing by way of mitigation can enter into a case where such an operation has been performed. Even though the operation were a battle to save a woman's life, says the law, the surgeon who performs it is a malefactor. Now, that's not what the law said. If they had paid any attention during the trial, they would have noticed that these 2 other doctors were describing how, hey, check her into a hospital, consult with another doctor, do the abortion, right? And the law that Hammer was charged under reads, and I'm going to take out a whole bunch of legal gobbledygook in the middle to just kind of hit. Any person who provides, supplies, or administers to a woman, or who uses or employs or causes to be used or employed any instrument or other means with intent thereby to procure the miscarriage of a woman, unless the same is necessary to preserve her life, in case of the death of the woman, is thereby guilty of manslaughter in the first degree. So there, specifically in the law that Hammer was charged under, it said it had that life of the mother exception. But it wasn't reported that way. If you go on newspapers.com and you look this up, you'll find that this was picked up all over the country. Paper after paper after paper after paper after paper printed this lie that Julius Hammer was going to prison because he fought valiantly to try to save his patient's life, even though the law said that he had to just let her die. And then they went on to misrepresent the facts. A year ago, Mrs. Marie Organesov, one of Dr. Hammer's wealthy patients, was sent to the hospital. She expected a child. Marie was never in the hospital with this pregnancy at all. They wanted the reader to believe that Marie had shown up in this hospital sick and pregnant and in need of immediate help. Not that she, called him on the phone, look, I need to see you, walked into his office. No, they painted this way. Let's see. Dr. Hammer was convinced that if Mrs. Ogasanov underwent the natural course, she would die. The chances were 1,000-to-1 against her recovery. But there was one operation which might save her. But this operation was against the law. Actually, according to his own testimony, Hammer really had just wanted to go home for the weekend. He didn't want to do this abortion, but Marie pestered him. Evidently, she said, do you want to delay this? So neither Hammer nor Diamond testified that they had any immediate sense that Marie's life was in danger. None. Okay. And as for the claim, the chances were 1,000-to-1 against her recovery. The other doctors had reported that, yeah, she had abortions for her purported health and kidney problems. This was no big, horrible, oh my gosh, if we don't do this, she's going to die situation. He told his friends that he would perform the operation regardless of the law, and did so. But he lost the fight with death, for Mrs. Oganesov succumbed to the shock. Well, first of all, she didn't succumb to shock. She succumbed to infection, which he failed to treat. Okay? Even Hammer in his defense didn't testify that there was any pre-abortion consultation in which he bravely announced that he was going to risk his freedom to save his patient. No, he showed Diamond some blood on his glove, forged ahead with his abortion, and then he's trying to cover his ass while 3 other doctors and 2 nurses are trying to save his patient's life. So, it's just, not only was this self-serving on Hammer's part, but you have to wonder what planet these reporters were on that they did this. But even 100 years later, we see this all the time. When you see news coverage about life of the mother abortions, they always talk about how these 3rd trimester post-viability abortions are only done when the woman's life or health is in horrible danger. And if you don't give it any thought, you go, oh, okay. But the minute you think about it, does that make any sense? Now let's talk a minute about what typically happens if a woman is past the point where the baby can survive, but she develops some kind of health problem and you need to get that baby out of her. That pregnancy needs to end now. Well, my best friend had this happen 3 times. 3 times she was in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, but not 40 weeks yet. I think she was 20 weeks with 30 weeks with 2 of them, 24 weeks with the 3rd one. And she developed gestational lupus crisis, and they had to get those babies out. And they did emergency C-sections, and they had those babies out of the mom and into the NICU within the hour. Bev was in a hospital. She had highly trained medical professionals there to deal with any complications of the pregnancy, any complications of the lupus, any complications of the C-section, and there to take care of the baby. They'd have been able, first of all, she was in an operating room. If she had needed transfusions, they'd have been able to do that. If she needed antibiotics, they would have had IV antibiotics right there. Assuming that the best thing was to induce labor, they could have done that in the hospital. A fully equipped hospital where you've got doctors and nurses and specialists and plasma and transfusions and antibiotics and heart monitors and all that stuff. How third trimester abortions are done is a process called labor and delivery. I am not making that up. They are labor and delivery abortions. That's what they're called. And they are not done in hospitals. They are done on an outpatient basis where the woman visits the clinic, stays in a motel with her mom or her husband or her sister or her boyfriend, whoever it is she brought with her. And then on the final day, she stays in the clinic until she has expelled the baby. And the first procedure that they do is something to kill the baby. Now, the usual procedure, they take this ginormous syringe. It's the amniocentesis syringe. But instead of pulling out amniotic fluid, what they're doing is they are injecting a drug called digoxin. And this is a heart medication, and an overdose of it will kill you. And if you watch the Planned Parenthood baby parts videos, you'll hear discussion about when and whether they dig. That's short for digoxin. Do you dig? At how many weeks do you start digging? That's what that's referring to, using digoxin to kill the baby. Now, this is not without risk. This is a great big needle. You're risking infection. You're risking that you accidentally get that digoxin into the mother's bloodstream instead of into the baby, and it can hurt her. So this is not a risk-free procedure. So why are you doing this if this woman's health is already in danger? If this woman is so sick that her life or health is in immediate danger, why would you take the time to perform this additional procedure and subject her to these additional risks when the only thing that they serve to do is make sure that you don't get a live birth? That's got nothing to do with saving this woman's life, does it? So they do something to kill the baby, and then they insert these little seaweed sticks called laminaria, and they pack her cervix full of these seaweed sticks, and overnight they absorb moisture from her body, they swell up, they dilate the cervix, she comes in the next day, they pull those out, they pack in a whole bunch more. Depending on how advanced the pregnancy is, they might just change them out once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, depending on how advanced the pregnancy is. And then finally, on the final day, they induce labor and she delivers a dead baby into the clinic toilet. And that's how that's done. Now, on what planet do you have a deathly ill woman and you tell her, no, do not go to a hospital. We want you in a motel room. Do not go someplace near to your home. We want you to travel to find somebody who's willing to do this. Because very few doctors, even those who specialize in abortion, even doctors who have made abortion their life's work, do not want to do these abortions after viability. Most of them don't even want to go past around 18 weeks. A lot of them have a 12-week cutoff. They've got how far they're comfortable with doing it, and they won't do it later. So it's not about the law. There are a lot of states in this country where New York. Now, the law doesn't specifically say in New York, you can do an abortion clear up until birth. What they did this kind of sneaky backdoor thing where the part of the law that the new law addressing abortion said, up until 24 weeks, except for health, blah, 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 blah. But elsewhere, they rescinded the law where there were penalties for abortion. So technically it's not legal, but it's not illegal either because there's no penalty. Okay, so we've got New York, I think Utah. So there's a lot of states where there's no legal limit, but it's not about the legal limit. It's about what the doctor's comfortable with. So she would have to travel to find somebody who is willing to do that digoxin injection into the heart of a baby that could otherwise be born alive. And as you can imagine, a lot of doctors can't stomach doing that. Some of them can. Curtis Boyd can, Warren Hearn. Oh my gosh, there's 2 women whose names elude me. Leroy Carhart. I wish I can remember those 2 women's names. Okay, so there's 5 I can think of off the top of my head. I'm not sure Carpin in Texas still does abortions. He might have quit. But he was willing. He didn't care. So she's going to have to travel to find somebody willing to do this. So she's going to have to avoid a hospital. She's going to have to travel. She's going to have to stay in a hotel room. She's going to have to avoid having any high-risk OBGYN there, anybody who would be a cardiologist or a pulmonologist or a rheumatologist or anybody to deal with her underlying health problem. There'd be no surgeon there. There'd be no blood transfusions available. Okay, none of these things that you would want to have on hand if your life was in danger are going to be there. So why would you go someplace where those things are not available? And you check into a hospital, you have an emergency C-section, that pregnancy, that life-threatening pregnancy is over within the hour. Okay? An abortion at that point is a 3 or 4 day process. So instead of ending the pregnancy within the hour, you do a 3 or 4 day process. Instead of doing it close to home, you have to travel a long way to find somebody who's willing to do it. Instead of having trained medical professionals, you just have your mom or your in-laws or whoever you brought. This makes no sense. But the media will breathlessly report it anyway, just like they falsely reported that it would have been illegal for Julius Hammer to do that abortion if he thought it was necessary to save Marie's life. Not at all. Not at all. He could have checked her into a hospital at any point and done this legally, openly. Nobody would have asked any questions. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Same shit, different century. I don't know how you want to say it, but I was pretty disgusted when I saw this new and tell the truth, because the media usually weren't quite that slobberingly willing to flat out lie to promote abortion back in 1920, but I found somebody who was.